What if you could commission something truly unique, say a custom-built factory or maybe a specific software system, and pay for it over time, even before it actually exists, and do it all within a framework that, prioritizes ethical conduct and fairness? It sounds like a remarkably adaptable financial solution, doesn't it? Well, today we're taking a deep dive into two fascinating contract types from Islamic finance that make this a reality: Istisna and its incredibly versatile cousin, Parallel Istisna. Our exploration is guided by Shari'ah Standard Number 11 from the Accounting and Auditing Organization for Islamic Financial Institutions, or AAOI-FIFI as it's known.
Right. And it's crucial to understand right from the start that these aren't sort of new, unproven ideas floating around. Their legitimacy is deeply rooted in established Islamic jurisprudence. It goes back centuries. It even draws from actions of the Prophet himself, like commissioning a specific ring or a pulpit. This immediately shows you how deeply ethical principles are woven into their very design. It's aiming for both tradition and, practical utility in the marketplace.
Okay, so to really get a handle on this, let's start with the basics. What exactly is an istisna contract? How does it operate at its most fundamental level?
Fundamentally, istisna is defined as, let me get the precise term, a contract for the sale of a described item in a liability, which requires manufacturing.
Described item in a liability sounds a little bit legalistic.
It does, yeah. But think of it this way. You're not buying an existing product off a shelf. Not at all. You're essentially buying a promise, a commitment for something very specific that will be created just for you.
Ah, okay. Like commissioning a tailor for a bespoke suit. Or maybe a builder for a custom house.
Exactly like that. The item doesn't exist yet. That's the absolute key. It's a future obligation.
So it's about commissioning a new creation, not just picking something ready-made. That sounds incredibly flexible, especially if you're, say, a financial institution. Does this mean the institution facilitating the contract doesn't need to own the item or the raw materials beforehand?
Precisely. And that's a key differentiator. The institution or financier doesn't need to pre-purchase or hold inventory, which is incredibly practical for large-scale manufacturing or, unique bespoke projects. What's also fascinating is the binding nature of this contract.
Binding.
Meaning, once agreed upon, it's firm. Can't just be walked away from, unlike maybe a mere preliminary promise or understanding. The rationale here, and this is reinforced by scholars like Imam Abu Yusuf, is pure fairness. Imagine a manufacturer investing significant time resources into a custom order.
Only for the client to change their mind.
Yeah, exactly. So this contract protects that investment. It ensures commitment on both sides.
With that kind of flexibility, though, there must be some very clear boundaries. The standard lays out some strict guardrails, doesn't it? What are the crucial prohibitions, the real no-nos that prevent misuse?
Absolutely. These guardrails are essential to maintain the ethical integrity. You can't just do anything. First, the manufacturer cannot stipulate freedom from defects. That's a big one.
Why is that?
Because you're commissioning something to be made to a certain specification. It must, by its nature, be fit for purpose. Defects aren't something you can just wave away up front like you might with a secondhand item sold as is. But maybe more critically, istisna cannot be used as a trick, the Arabic term is hila, to disguise riba-based financing, usurious financing.
Ah, okay. So preventing it from just being a loan in disguise.
Precisely. This is paramount. For example, the standard specifically prohibits scenarios where the manufacturer essentially buys and sells goods with different immediate versus deferred prices just to create a veiled interest payment, or even where the client himself is essentially the manufacturer. These are designed to prevent what are called aina sales.
Aina sales.
Yes, they're strictly forbidden in Islamic finance because they can easily camouflage an interest-bearing loan under the guise of a sale. It's about ensuring the spirit of the transaction is ethical, not just, ticking the boxes on the form.
That makes total sense. It's about preventing the contract from being twisted into something it was never intended to be. So, digging into the specifics, what kind of things can actually be manufactured under an istisna contract? Does it apply to anything and everything?
Good question. No, not everything. Istisna applies only to items where human workmanship significantly transforms their natural state. So think about things that involve a real manufacturing process: building, coating, assembling.
Okay, so that means natural products like, say, agricultural goods, fruits, vegetables, or maybe animals. They wouldn't typically qualify.
Generally not, no, because they don't involve manufacturing in that specific industrial or transformative sense. It has to be something made. Now, the contract can be for something truly unique and custom made, something that doesn't even have a market equivalent. As long as it can be precisely described, to avoid ambiguity.
Precision is key then.
Absolutely.
Hmm.
But it can also apply to standardized items. Mass-produced things, maybe like a specific model of car, provided it's being manufactured for you under the contract.
Right, just to be crystal clear for everyone listening, when you say made for you, does that mean you can't use Istisna'a to buy, say, that specific car that's already sitting over there on the dealer's lot?
That's a truly crucial distinction. And yes, you've hit it exactly. The subject matter cannot be a specific pre-existing item, not this factory or that car.
If you can point to it, it's just a regular sale.
Precisely. Istisna is always for something that will be made based on a very precise description. It's about commissioning something new. It's fundamentally about an obligation to deliver something in the future, a debt in liability, not the sale of an owned asset that's already sitting there.
Got it. And what about the manufacturer's side, their obligations?
Well, they must complete the work according to the exact specifications agreed upon, and within the agreed time frame, or at least a customary time frame if one wasn't explicitly set. And interestingly, the contract can include a warranty, a guarantee against defects for a specific period.
Oh, okay. That's allowed.
Yes, perfectly allowed, because it simply ensures the usability and the quality of the manufactured item, which is the whole point.
Okay, let's talk money. Always a key part of any contract. How is the price set in Istisna'a? And what kind of flexibility do clients have when it comes to actually paying?
Right, the price. It absolutely must be clearly known and agreed upon right when the contract is concluded. No vagueness. Any ambiguity could lead to disputes down the line, so clarity is paramount.
Fixed price from the start.
Exactly. Now, as for payment flexibility, it's actually quite broad. That's one of the contract's real strengths. Payment can be in cash, obviously, but it can also be in kind, meaning another item, or maybe even services, or quite intriguingly, it can be the usufruct, the benefit of an asset.
The usufruct. How does that work in practice?
Well, this option is particularly powerful for applications like build, operate, transfer contracts, BOT projects.
Yeah.
Imagine you commission a new power plant. Instead of paying cash up front or in stages, you might agree to let the builder operate the plant and keep the revenue, or a share of it, for a set number of years as their payment.
Ah, I see. So they get the use or benefit of the asset as payment.
Precisely. Payment can also be deferred, paid later, or made in installments. And these installments can even be linked to specific delivery stages or completion milestones, say 10% on foundation completion, 20% on structure completion, and so on.
As long as those stages are clearly defined in the contract itself.
Exactly. Clearly defined milestones.
So with all that flexibility in payment, timing, and structure, does this mean you could just set the price using a cost plus profit model? Similar to how mirror bottle contracts often work?
No. And this is a really significant distinction, often a point of confusion. You absolutely cannot structure Istisna'a as cost plus a known profit.
Really? Why not? It sounds like it might simplify things.
It might seem like it, but here's why. A Mirabaha contract, which is cost plus, requires the item to be existing. It has to be already owned by the seller, and they have to know its original cost to then add their profit margin. In Istisna'a, remember, the item doesn't exist yet when you make the contract, and its final manufacturing cost. That's actually unknown at the start. You're agreeing on a fixed final price for a future deliverable, regardless of what the manufacturer's actual costs turn out to be.
So the manufacturer bears the cost risk. If materials get cheaper, they benefit. If they get more expensive.
They bear that risk, yes. If their actual manufacturing cost goes down, they aren't obligated to reduce the agreed price for you, the client. They made a good deal or were efficient. Conversely, and this protects the client, if their costs unexpectedly increase, you are not obligated to pay more than the originally agreed fixed price.
It really emphasizes that fixed price nature.
It does. It locks it in. Now, related to pricing and time, an increase in price just because you're extending the payment term, that is strictly not allowed.
Because that smells like interest, Reba.
Exactly. It falls squarely under the prohibition of riba. Charging more just for time is the essence of usury. However, a decrease in price for paying early, that is allowed.
Oh, interesting. A discount for early payment is okay.
Yes, provided it wasn't a condition stipulated in the original contract. It has to be a voluntary reduction by the seller later on, or perhaps agreed upon at the time of early payment. This aligns with established principles and even prophetic guidance, like the famous saying to Ubay ibn Ka'b, encouraging debt reduction. Reduce half your debt. It promotes relief without contractual exploitation.
Okay, that clarifies the core Istisna'a contract really well. But you mentioned its powerful cousin, parallel Istisna'a. This sounds like where financial institutions really come into play, especially for big projects. How does this double-layered approach actually work?
Yes, parallel istisna is incredibly common in modern Islamic finance. It's a key tool. It allows institutions to effectively facilitate large-scale manufacturing, construction, infrastructure projects. You name it. Essentially, it involves the institution entering into two completely separate istisna contracts. That separation is vital.
Two contracts. Okay, walk us through them.
Right. So in the first contract, let's call it the buy side, the Islamic financial institution acts as the client. They sign an istisna contract with the actual manufacturer or contractor, say a construction company that will build a hospital. The payment in this first contract, from the institution to the builder, is often made immediately, or perhaps in stages as work progresses.
Okay, so the bank commissions the builder. Then what?
Then simultaneously or nearly simultaneously, this is where the parallel part comes in. The institution puts on a different hat. It now acts as the manufacturer for its own end client, the ultimate buyer who wants the hospital. The institution signs a second, parallel istisna contract with this end client, agreeing to deliver the same hospital with the same specifications.
I see. So the bank is the buyer in one contract and the seller or manufacturer in the other.
Exactly. And the payment in the second contract, from the end client to the institution, is typically deferred or paid in installments over a longer period. The institution's profit, then, comes from the difference in price between these two independent contracts, the price they pay the builder versus the price they receive from the end client.
It sounds efficient, but potentially complex. Managing two parallel contracts. What are the biggest risks or maybe temptations here? You mentioned the separation is vital. Is there a strict no linkage rule?
Absolutely critical. You've hit the nail on the head. There must be no linkage between these two contracts. They must remain legally and operationally separate and independent. This isn't just, a minor detail. It's the ethical bedrock of the whole structure.
Why is that separation so fundamental?
Because the institution cannot simply be a pass-through entity, just shuffling papers. It has to take on real risk and responsibility. It cannot make its obligations in the second contract, like delivering the hospital to its end client, conditional on the performance or non-performance of the first contract.
Meaning, the bank can't say to its client, sorry, we can't deliver the hospital because our builder messed up.
Exactly that. The bank, acting as the manufacturer in the second contract, is fully responsible to its client, regardless of what happens with the original builder. This separation is absolutely vital to ensure ethical compliance and avoid prohibited structures. It prevents the institution from becoming a mere financial intermediary charging a fee without taking on genuine contractual risk. It means the institution, in its role as manufacturer for the end client, bears all the responsibilities and costs associated with that role. Things like ensuring quality, potentially maintenance, insurance, until the item is properly delivered.
So it can't just transfer those obligations back to the original builder in the first contract.
No, it cannot simply pass the buck. It assumes true responsibility in that second contract.
That makes perfect sense. The institution isn't just facilitating a deal, they're taking on a genuine manufacturing commitment, legally speaking. So with these often large, potentially custom projects, what about things like quality control during the process and actual delivery? And inevitably, what happens if things go wrong, if the manufacturing doesn't go according to plan?
Well, regarding oversight, the institution, when it's acting as the client in that first contract, can certainly appoint technical experts, engineers, an office to supervise the manufacturing, to make sure it adheres to specifications. And conversely, if the institution is the manufacturer in the second contract, it can even authorize its own client, the end user, to oversee the process. It promotes transparency.
Okay, and delivery, how does that work?
The manufacturer's responsibility typically ends once the item is actually delivered, or importantly, once the client is unable to take possession, even if they don't physically take it right away. Now, if the manufactured item doesn't meet the agreed specifications upon delivery, the client has options.
They don't have to accept faulty goods.
No, they can refuse it entirely. Or they might accept it as is, perhaps if the deviation is minor. Or they could agree to accept it, but with a price reduction to compensate for the shortfall.
Gives the client recourse.
Yes. And early delivery is allowed, provided the item meets the specs. If the client refuses to take possession without a valid reason, maybe they just don't have space yet, they can actually be compelled to accept. Even what's called constructive possession counts, where the client is simply granted the ability and authority to take possession. That's often enough to end the manufacturer's liability for the item itself.
And what if things really go off the rails? Say the manufacturer just fails to complete the project.
The standard actually outlines different judgments depending on why there was non-completion. It's quite detailed. For instance, if the manufacturer fails due to their own fault, they might forfeit their work, or the client might, in some interpretations, get the partially completed building or item essentially for free, depending on the specifics, to ensure fairness.
Wow, serious consequences.
Yes, but if the failure is due to the client, maybe they didn't provide necessary access or information, then the manufacturer would typically be compensated for the work they've already done. It really illustrates the comprehensive nature of the standard, trying to anticipate these real-world scenarios.
It sounds incredibly thorough. What about delays on the client side in taking delivery?
The contract can actually anticipate that. It can stipulate that if the client delays taking possession beyond a reasonable time, the manufacturer is authorized to sell the item on the client's behalf. They then return any surplus from the sale to the client or charge any deficit to the client's account. It provides a practical mechanism.
And one last point on things going wrong, penalty clauses. Are they allowed for delays?
Yes, a fair penalty clause for delayed delivery by the manufacturer is allowed if it's agreed upon in the contract. It incentivizes timely completion. But crucially, a penalty clause for the client's delayed payment is generally not allowed, unless perhaps due to proven procrastination without a valid reason, because again, that can easily become a form of REBA.
Right, avoids charging extra just for time on the payment side.
Exactly. The distinction is between penalizing performance failure versus charging for time.
So, wrapping this all up, what does this mean for you, our listener? We've taken quite a deep dive into Istisna'a and parallel Istisna'a. We've uncovered their unique structures, the really detailed conditions that govern them. It's clearly far more intricate than just a simple loan or a standard purchase.
Exactly. What we see is that these contracts offer immense flexibility, real practical tools for manufacturing, for project finance. But, and this is the key, they are underpinned by remarkably strict rules. These rules are meticulously designed. They aim for fairness, for transparency, and crucially, to prevent any hint of usury, REBA, or any kind of exploitative practice. The level of detail in Shari'ah Standard Number 11 truly highlights the depth of thought that goes into balancing very practical, modern commercial needs with deeply held, long-standing ethical principles.
So for you, the learner, this isn't just about understanding some niche financial contracts. It's really about seeing how centuries-old principles are thoughtfully adapted and applied, how they facilitate modern commerce, allowing for significant innovation, but doing so within a clear, robust ethical framework. It shows that finance doesn't have to be, a Wild West. It can be designed with purpose and principle.
And perhaps here's a final thought to leave you with. Consider how this level of detailed ethical governance, integrated right into the mechanics of finance, could potentially inspire similar frameworks. Think about other industries or maybe other types of contracts or agreements in our lives. What other areas might benefit from such a rigorous upfront integration of ethical principles with practical application? What new possibilities could emerge if we designed more of our systems with ethics at the core from the very beginning?